Hello and welcome to the Rogue Monkey podcast, the show that shares insightful stories to motivate, inspire and support you on your own journey through both work and life. It's hard to believe that January has already been and gone, and we've only got 2 episodes left before season 8 draws to a close. For our 63rd episode, we're really pleased to be joined by one of our previous guests. Andy Hailey from episode 55 shares with us today the learnings he's had from completing his research in learning, supporting and working with young people. So today's conversation is very much exploring what he's learned about how to plan, communicate and reflect upon sessions. We draw examples from sport, business and many other walks of life. So whatever your role is, we've no doubt there'll be something to glean from this episode. For those of you that are new to the podcast, Andy is the Director of Aquatics at the Tanglin Trust School in Singapore. He is renowned for having a passion in transferring world-leading research into practice in order to maximise the experience for anyone he works with and supports on their journey through sport, education and life. Just before we start the show, it was in the last week our 2nd birthday, and we did record a special YouTube episode reflecting back on the last 2 years and 62 episodes. So if you're yet to check that out, please head over to our YouTube channel and check out that recording, which is linked in the show notes. Okay, let's get into it and the penultimate interview of season 8. Episode 63, Andy Hailey, Maximising the Experience, Minimising Dropout. Hello, Andy, and welcome back to the show. How are you doing?
Yeah, all good, mate. How are you?
Yeah, fantastic. You're our first returning guest, which is very exciting, but I'm keen to explore a little bit of what you've been doing since we last spoke.
Yeah, nice one. Thanks for having me back. Happy to share.
So what's been going on? Because you're in a part of the world that's still going through a bit of turmoil at the moment, but it sounds like professionally you've been making some leaps forwards.
Yeah, I think we've never been sort of stopped, like completely stopped. Maybe 2, maximum 3 weeks. I think we've had. They reduced us down to 1-to-1 coach athlete ratio, so effectively just stopped everyone from training. But yeah, we've had strict measures, but we haven't had the strictest of measures, if that makes sense. So we've kind of been drawn out longer, but we have still been able to coach. And since we last spoke, I've managed to get I think we're both doing our masters sort of say in tandem together, and I learned a lot in that period of time from since we first spoke, and finishing my main thesis, and I'm getting a better understanding for it, and also in that time working with a lot of other people, speaking to other researchers in the field of my interests, actually just being able to have the summer period where none of the kids went away, but no school was on. So I really got to explore quite a bit as a coach, and we've had some new tech come in, which has been brilliant, which I can talk about later. I just really experiment. Like the competitions are few and far between. There's nothing really like we're working towards, which is tough. And we're starting to get competitions being spoken about again, and we might have one this Saturday at a very low level, but still it's an opportunity, I think, to play around with what you do in the session. I always kind of think of it as like when my brother went vegetarian, and he wasn't the best cook, but when he went vegetarian, it forced him to be a better chef. It made his food taste better. So I think kind of that. He took away something, but actually it made him, it's made me really focus on other parts of what I do, the training. Now, how do I still get that motivation that competition used to have, or still does to an extent, but how do I get that back in the sessions? I think, I've learned a lot from other coaches giving ideas, and one of the best things, as you know, has been this whole sharing culture that's kicked off with, technological improvements with Zoom and Teams and people having the time to sit down and share. I think it's been really valuable.
What's been kind of your biggest takeaway from your thesis specifically? I don't know if you want to talk around that a little bit.
Yeah, I can do. So rolling on from somewhere from part when we spoke before, part one. I think obviously with the thesis, I got to do a study that actually got to look at it, just get some evidence here. COVID not restrictions meant my sample size wasn't as big as I wanted. However, I still was able to see some pretty telling results, which demonstrated the effectiveness of, which I used in particular, was the constraints-led approach in swimming. I also understand and appreciate how coaches have probably been using constraints, and they have been, just, you know, they haven't necessarily called it the constraints-led approach or constraints, just good, you know, you could just, it's just good observant coaching, and they've put a constraint in on a group or an individual to get an outcome, behavior change. But basically what I did was I compared and I had to construct a traditional approach, which is very difficult because it's so many, you know, so I had to kind of use coach educational resources, what's online, kind of my own experience. I've been coaching for 15 years, so I have taught, you know, what you could say a traditional way, plus kind of what the literature defines it as. So I kind of constructed a traditional approach, and it worked out as this kind of reductionist, linear process to teaching a tumble turn. So we by breaking up the turn into the approach, the flip, the push off, and the transition. I then built based on a kind of concept of building schema, like repeated error reducing steps in a whole part method to build schema, to really try to get that perfect component and put it back together. And the way we tested it was having a 50-meter sprint at the start and a 50-meter sprint post. And this was meant to be done over 4 weeks. The intervention was meant to be longer. It was meant to be a retention test, you know, but as these things kind of work out, you know, it's very difficult. So I literally did this all in one session. Whereas my other group was used with the constraints-led approach group. And my instruction to them from the start was very simple. Just feel fast. You know, you're going to be, you've got, so look to my watch, you've got 20 minutes, because I only allowed 30 minutes of the whole thing. You've got 20 minutes now to do as many turns as you want. All you got to do is just feel fast. So that was off, you know, off they go. And then I just used like questioning. I just sat back and observed and used questioning. You know, what did you do? Did you feel fast? No, not really. Okay, why didn't you? And then you see a kid do one really good turn. Oh, what did you do? So that was kind of for me like, okay, that's important observation. Now I can start to play with the constraints. And something that I picked on quite quick is with the constraints-led approach, it's very difficult to give individual constraints to a big group. I tried, and it was like trying to spin a load of plates, you know, like it was hectic. It could be done, but it really drawn upon every. I was very stressed after 40 minutes, put it that way. Whereas I found it much easier to use general constraints that allowed for individual interpretation and individual kind of ways of navigating the problem and finding strategies. So what I observed with these kids, the average age is about 9.5. The classic one, swimming up to the wall, almost stopping and flipping and being very close. So I just said to the group, look, I want you to feel as fast as you are. We're going in fast. And some of them I even put flippers on to kind of really amplify that speed. I said, just try to use as few strokes as possible between the flags and the wall. Try and really challenge yourself to perform the turn using as few strokes as possible. And what we saw was kind of like, you know, mistakes. We saw them trying to turn from 2 meters away and completely missing it. We saw, you know, these kind of things. But after 2 or 3 attempts, they started to really hone in on it. And suddenly I was seeing them pulling with their heads down with almost perfect entry. You know, from I was like, wow, you know, very smooth. And what I think was important, and this is what I backed onto what we're talking about when we first met, was that task simplification and the integration of the full coordination patterns of the skill. I wasn't pulling anything apart. I wasn't deconstructing anything, which allowed that the perception action coupling to take place. And by not giving my feedback as error correction, I found I wasn't overly constraining them to what they could do. I really let them go for it. And I found with the group that I had in the traditional group, I think maybe because I'm more aware of it, and you have to remember I might have a bias in this, but I found I was overly constraining them into the decision making. You know, I was telling them, right, swim up to the tee, take 1 stroke and flip. Okay, and the next one, you're going to take 2 strokes and flip. And then one kid, he swam in and did a full turn and pushed off. I was like, no, I didn't ask you to do that. Now, okay, so I'm being a bit obtuse here, but he did what, you know, and suddenly it also dawned on me what impact this has on behavior. If they're not fitting my model, well, I think with kids, I think we can all say if they don't fit what you want to do as a teacher, you tend to get a clash, which ends up with them sitting out, them not liking you, me getting cross with them. You know, this wasn't part of my study, but it was a very prominent observation in the study, which I think would be really exciting to look into further. So yeah, that was really in a nutshell what happened. And actually, the two groups, should know this like the back of my hand now, but the traditional group added, on average, out of the 10 swimmers, they added 1.2 seconds. The constraint set approach group improved by 0.9 seconds. And when I ran the statistical analysis, I think I might have told you, it was like, wow, it wasn't significant. And obviously a small sample size, so that has impacts as well. But I remember thinking, well, it's not statistically significant, but like if on average they're 0.9 seconds quicker, and in the turn segment, the 15-meter turn segment, they were 0.27 seconds quicker, just in that turn bit alone. I think that's pretty significant as a coach. I think in a 30-minute session, I managed to get that improvement. But unfortunately, I think to really get that, I use the word proven loosely, but kind of really proven to a deeper level, I think bigger sample group, spread it over 4 or 5 weeks, and also get a retention tested at some point, I think would be really interesting to see. But the signs are there for its impact. And through that, my understanding of applications for coaches, without going into the depths of the theory, without going into the confusing language, which I think is one of the downsides of ecological dynamics and ecological psychology and the non-linear stuff. I think a lot of people have switched off by the terminology, but actually what is being done is very simple. If done right, it is quite simple. But what it does is it challenges the way you think of yourself as the teacher or the coach quite a lot, which is where I found it uncomfortable, but also having to accept that my role as the coach is as non-linear as the kids learning. So as long as you've got a supportive network around you in the environment where you coach, I think you should be able to explore and try stuff. If you're not in that environment, I think obviously it's your job and that, but it'd be interesting to see if you have you're kind of in a role as a coach and you're not able to express yourself as a coach. I think I'd be a little bit worried.
I think this, I guess in layman terms, what we're talking about there is just very much the being instructive, very clearly defined, very direct in them looking to you. And you see that a lot, especially with young athletes, that they get told and they do, then they get told and they do. And that thought process and exploration is something perhaps they don't feel like they get permission to do, which is it's quite ironic in a sense, because if you think, my memory, it's probably changed now, but my memory of school PE was you might get given a hoop, a stick, a ball, and 3 other things and go, come up with a game, see you in half an hour, and off you go. And actually, it's kind of almost gone completely the other way, where it's like, what do you want to tell me to do? And like you said, there's potentially a bias, and there's definitely a single lens, which in a group setting is really difficult to do. Whereas if you go down this explorative route of saying, look, I've got 30 individuals in my group, I know I all want to improve their turns, for example, or in another sport, it might be their striking or whatever it is. And actually, they've all got a different way of probably developing that skill. So let's give them some basic parameters, time of say 20 minutes, a bit of space to work in and whatever it is, and then go, right, start asking the questions and let them explore. And I feel like what you tend often do is you often unleash shackles, if you like. And I remember listening to Florent Manadou's coach talk a few years ago, and he was talking about a guy that he coached called Yannick Agnel, 200 freestyle Olympic gold medalist in London. And he had a hand that did this. So at the front of his stroke, instead of having a completely extended straight arm, his hand kinked off to the left. Now, a standard coaching model would coach that out of somebody, and they would try and square it around straight. And he kept trying, and he was very much an artistically feel-based coach. And he said, it doesn't feel right. You turning my hand straight, it just doesn't feel right. And it was mad, because what they did was they actually ended up x-raying his wrist, and he has a slightly longer bone on the inside of his wrist than what a normal person, say normal population, would have. Therefore, that was a more natural position for him. So when he was swimming front crawl, it was natural for him to be in that position. But actually, if you'd have had a coach that would be like, no, this is how we do it, you will do it like this, it can often, the swimmers like, that doesn't feel right for me as an individual. So how do we get to a point where, as a coaching and teaching and any other, I guess, instruction based career, that you're actually comfortable in taking off the shackles of what the system says you can and can't do, and going, I tell you what, you try something different and see what they come up with?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think one of the things that always strikes me is whenever I listen in on talks and conferences and groups of coaches and podcasts, I think one of the most obvious thing that every coach really recognizes is the nuances with people and the individual nature, that we're all complex, but yet our approaches have been, myself included, coach education resources and kind of models are pitching towards one size fits all. And I think, one of the things I struggle with, I think I've come round to now, and one of the big things I've really challenged challenged me when I started looking at ecological dynamics and the approaches within it. I was like, well, I remember chatting with my former colleague Rick Shuttleworth, and I was like, Rick, where do energy systems fit in this? Some coaches, we know we need this time in this system, blah, 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 blah. And I think one of the big things over 2 years is, I've gone, well, actually, does it matter? And there's probably going to be a lot of people who would criticize me for saying that. But what I mean is, I think it's come up on a few talks where aerobic capacity for prepubescent kids has come up a lot. It even came up on a swimming conference recently. And I think, there's probably some truth in that. But if we say all kids need to improve their aerobic capacity, then that's a one size fits all. And I think by talking about, I think some of the talks go on, some coaches are using anaerobic energy system as training. And my kind of challenge that was, are they going down the route of anaerobic, or are they just trying to work on fast swimming because they recognize the task representativeness of fast swimming, full body coordination at speed? Now, if you do that a lot, you will, on the face of it, you'd probably look at it and go, well, that's an anaerobic set. But actually, it's not. I'm working on the skill of full body coordination patterns at fast speed. And something that myself, I've been influenced a lot by becoming a really good friend of mine, Andrew Sheaf, over in the University of Virginia. And I won't try and do his accent. It would just embarrass me and him. But it's do it right, do it fast, and do it under pressure. And I think one of the best examples I've had of that was coaching recently with a swimmer before nationals out here in June. And we had 6 weeks. And this is when we were put into limited group sizes. And we worked on, classic swimming golf. All right, just reduce the stroke count, try and get the time down, everything, lowest score possible. I think loads of coaches do it. But I find it really effective because of the number of ways you can manipulate that kind of task. And she got down to, I thought, she's looking very good. And she got down to about 61, 50 back. She got down to about 61 in total. Then I really pushed her to get that score down at speed. So, right, get the score down, but, you've got to be within 32 and 34 seconds. And she got down to about 55. and then actually she got down to 53, sorry. So that's a big drop. And then suddenly I went up to her a few weeks later and I said, look, you know what? For the next 15 minutes, you're completely under my say. I'm not going to tell you how many reps you're doing. I'm not going to tell you how much rest you're going to get. But if I say go, you go. And it was kind of like she knew that she trusts me, you know, that you have to in that kind of position. And she went, first 1 second rest, go. Second one, I gave her a bit more, like third, you know, and I really just played around with it. I just looked at her. I looked at her when she came up and just pushed, and that was the pressure. There was no knowing. There was no knowing for her. I actually removed the pace clock, so she couldn't even see how much of the 15 minutes was gone. And she just put the effort. So that was the pressure coming on, and it worked brilliantly. She knocked 5 seconds off her 200 long course time, and she's a 17-year-old girl. So for me, it was like, that was a big win. Was it because of that set? I don't know. You know, I think it had a big contribution because the way the feedback she gave me and how confident she felt in her stroke, I felt was really important. That kind of completed that athlete loop. So coming back to where I was challenging myself with the energy systems, when I was using that kind of approach, she was working 200-meter race pace, but the focus was on skill. So if I trained her, telling her the number of reps to work on a certain pace, get her heart rate right, that could all be fine. You know, I think it could work for that particular thing. But she might never have felt that feeling of being fast and powerful that she might not have ever found her stroke. She might just have worked hard. Whereas by coming at it from a skills point of view, I'm guaranteed almost to get, well, you are guaranteed to work an energy system of some kind. Now, if you try and improve your golf score, you've got to go faster, or you've got to put in a stronger pull, faster kick, better push off. I mean, her underwaters, I've actually had to look at her because she was going past 15 meters. She went from sort of 10, 11 meters, suddenly smashing past 15. So, you know, suddenly then the constraints, the rules of the sport then have to come in to play with what we do next. But it really forced these things. Now, I don't think I could have got that with a energy systems first approach. It was the skill approach that got her working in the right energy systems for that race. But because of the way we went about it, she implicitly knew. So there were some sessions where I think my questioning was a bit stupid. I was like, what did you do to feel? What did you do on that one? And actually, I realized sometimes you just don't know how to put it into words. Something, you know, there's feelings you have in the body. I think for a lot of swimmers, you know, we know this. Like, there's that feel, there's that understanding of the environment you're in. Maybe, you know, in the theory, we could call it attunement to your environment. And I always find it really interesting when you listen to triathletes talk, because those triathletes are clearly very fit, but they don't feel. They don't, you know, they wish they could swim like a swimmer, but you know, but they're as fit as any of the other swimmers, but they don't have that attunement to the water. They don't feel. They don't have that same sense of feeling. And I think being able to feel and attune to water is a skill. It's skillful to increase your propulsion and decrease your drag. And that, I mean, if you can do that with water, you're pretty much on a bit of a winner, aren't you? Because that's, if you break it down to its, break it right down to its most basic points, whether you're trying to keep your head above water because you've fallen off a ship in the sea, or you're trying to win an Olympic medal, you're trying to increase propulsion and decrease drag forces.
That's fascinating. And I think it's kind of been brought home a little bit. I don't know if you've seen recently a girl called Lucy Charles Barkley won the World Championships Ironman. Now, Lucy was a swimmer, was a very good swimmer, and then went into triathlon from the swimming world. And I think you can often cross paths, I think, with different athletes, especially in triathlon, that either have or haven't got that feel. And when they have got it, because they've come from a swimming background and they were a club swimmer, they don't even think about it. It's second nature to them. And kind of exactly what you alluded to there. The ones that have tried to learn to swim on top of the stuff they're already doing, they're seeking for almost like the golden snitch. They know it's there, but they can't quite grasp what it is you're trying to get. And I find that fascinating when especially when you see younger kids that have just got it, and whatever you want to define it as. But when you watch them swim up and down, you can see, they can feel what they're doing, and they just move through the water really, really well. And I almost feel like when you start moving down some of these very strict prescriptive sets, especially with the real youngsters, and that's the language you're using with them, you can almost coach that out of them, because the goal doesn't become to use my superpower of a natural feel in the water to swim faster, or in any other sport, my natural ability, if you like, or predisposition to certain types of skills that allowed you to excel in that area. They actually get coached out of that because they think they need to achieve a certain time on a certain set or get a certain number of reps in. And that's just like, well, what's the outcome we're actually looking for here? And pretty much what you said on its fundamental level. Like we're trying to get back to absolute basics with whatever we do. Now, yes, there's 1,001 ways of doing it, but I think too often it can get way too complicated, and especially when it's science driven with the real youngsters. And it's actually like we are laying the foundations for the years ahead here, and it might not be in swimming, but actually their ability to understand how to move through water is a skill that's going to stay with them for life.
Yeah. I mean, we've worked well, and I've worked well with my PE colleagues at the school I'm at, and we've changed. We used to have a curriculum that was based on, year 7, you do freestyle, backstroke, year 8, you do breaststroke, fly, and that was there for a long time. Eventually, the right person got in, and those conversations could start. And it's actually like, when you really think about it, you've got 8 weeks of lessons. Do you need to work on freestyle? Do you need to work on backstroke? Do you need to work on any of the strokes, or do we just need to look at ways that we can improve water literacy? If they're a competitive swimmer, they're probably in a competitive swim squad by the time they're in senior school. So what can we really get from these PE lessons? Also, how do we get those kids who are over there sat out every week because they don't want to get their hair wet, they don't want to get in the water? I've walked past the pool and it could be as much as 50% of them just sat out not doing nothing. How do we get them in? And the other big one for me was most of the teachers, and I don't think they would mind me saying this, didn't like teaching swimming. It was a bit nervous because I think there was so much pressure on them to know and regurgitate sessions and models and things, where actually, and I worked with them and I helped with curriculums before, so it was my fault, overly constraining their abilities to teach. So when we changed it, we kind of said, look, well, we've got these principles, propulsion and drag, and what's a key thing we need to really sell? I mean, I think in the UK, the horrible news headlines have been the number of people drowning and dying in water and open water environments. What can we do with our environments? At the moment, because of COVID, we can't get to the sea. For us, it's the sea. But that'd be great place to do lessons down there. I mean, the Aussies have been doing it for a long time with the surf lifesaving. But we have availability of water polo. We have the availability of anything you can think of in the water. And a good example, I remember walking past the pool that we use, and we have used things like the basic movement skills from the athletic skills model for the teachers to kind of think, well, how many of these basic movements, and we kind of tweaked them to be a bit more aquatic focused. How many of these things can we get in one lesson? And how can we make them coordinate together well? And we would have things like, have 3 stations set up. One's a life-saving station, one's a water polo station, one's for some relays. But all of them have had the constraint put on them. Their knees have to stick together when they're in the water. And the water polo players have flippers on. So they were doing butterfly leg kick everywhere. And they probably did whips and whips and whips for butterfly leg kick. But through coordinating with the full body, whether it was towing, whether it was chasing a ball, swimming a ball, throwing a ball, just swimming, like they're able to coordinate that movement with full limb coordination. And, that for me, it kind of is getting us along the scale. It's not it's easy to kind of think there's a this and that, just sliding it up the scale towards that task simplification versus that task reductionism. And I can tell you which one, anecdotally again, which one they enjoy more is one. I've walked past the pool and I can see the PE teachers are absolutely in it. 2, I don't see kids sitting on the bench. And if they're only going to get better and more competent in water, if they're actually in able to they're in it. So I think that's been a really good lesson. I think for from a curriculum point of view, that really we strip away the curriculum and don't think of it as too much of, you can only swim strokes to swim. Well, actually, there's any way you can get through it. What works best for you? And I think the research that I don't know if you're familiar with him, or Chris Button out in New Zealand, big on the water safety. It's incredible, like the way that they're looking into how they use life saving to teach aquatic water literacy. We're starting to look at it for the infant program at our school. And I really liked the Swim England checklist. What every kid should, they've got to be able to float for 30 seconds. They've got to be able to tread water. They've got to be able to swim 100 meters in their clothes. These kind of things I think are really, really important. So how do we train those skills? And then what do they lead to? Because remember, most people who get in a pool aren't going to the Olympics.
I think, I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's a tangent I'll happily go off on. How many people out there have got kids or teachers or coaches or feel like the system, whether it's, let's call it the curriculum of what, and we can insert as appropriate. You could be an English teacher, you could be a science teacher, you could be a swimming coach, you could be a lessons teacher or a football coach. How many people feel like we're getting too far down the prescriptive and measurement end for the vast majority of people, when actually that's not the outcome we're looking for? If you ask most kids when they're 25, maybe, talk about your best experiences from school, I don't think that many of them are going to reel off the A that they got. They're going to talk about that teacher, that coach, that class group, whatever it was that they engaged with, that gave them the freedom to be the best version of who they are and pull on their threads of interest. And I think we can talk about this in competitive swimming sense, but I do believe we can go all the way to the other end of the spectrum and just talk about education and the curriculum as a whole in the school sector. I do feel like there's a podcast in that by itself, talking to different people and saying, actually, I've worked in a range of schools, colleges and universities now, and I've seen it done very well. And I've seen it boil down to the fact that, I went back to my original school, pre-COVID 3 years ago, and did a presentation to the sixth formers talking about career options. And I said, when I was here, I could do sport every day for a minimum of half an hour. And they said, no, we do English and maths every single day, because that's the grades that we're assessed on as a school as to whether we're successful, because it's now owned by business, obviously, with the whole academy system. That's the metrics they use. Therefore, that's what the school day defines. And I'm like, how many kids are going to get to 25 or 30 and now not be engaged in activity because it's not classed as a priority? So I do feel like I do feel like the curriculum, certainly in this country, I can't speak for different parts of the world, but I do feel like we're getting to a point where it's getting reduced down to such arbitrary metrics, which is as far away from what the young people that we work with actually want to be engaged in it for. They want to be in it for much more richer involvement, not because of an arbitrary outcome.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like that KPI driven. And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier. I think definitely the older they get, the less receptive they are to explore. So the older the athletes I've coached, and you kind of give them that freedom to explore a bit, rattles their cage a lot because they're not used to it. They've had decisions made for them, and the information kind of given to them, and they really struggle with it. Like I see that a lot, and I think I might have said this before. You ask a kid in the infant school what they want. If I ask my son, what do you want? He'll say watermelon. It's his favorite, it's his favorite thing. If I ask a 16-year-old kid, what do you want? They're going to think, why is he asking me what I want? What does he want me to say to that question? And I don't understand the complexity. There are clearly different complexities going on between the two age groups. My son's 2 and a 16-year-old, but I think at some point, kids through the system, and I see it seems to be around in secondary school, where they lose that ability to have that autonomy to explore, and they start to get used to it. And I think, like probably our generation, I think when you listen onto the news and you hear people talk, you hear business leaders talk, and they say kind of how useless are the millennials. I think, well, why are they saying that? Is it because we can't problem solve? And if we're given the opportunity to, we're freeze because we're scared to make mistakes. If we can't bring it back to swimming, if I'm standing there as a coach and literally every mistake a kid makes, I'm kind of correcting, in that sense, it's kind of all they're going to, when I stop correcting them and tell them to explore, it's going to be earth shattering. And I always find it interesting. I mean, I did this for years, like when a kid would finish a swim race, I talked to them about the errors. And it took, I stopped a few years ago. It was actually when I was working with the younger kids. I said, look, you just race. When you come back to me, you feedback on the 3 things actually it was 2. Pick 2 things that you rate out of 5. 5 being really good, 1 being so good, and tell me why it was really good. And you get all sorts of answers. But that made me realize, why don't I do that with my senior athletes on a different level? And obviously, I'm going to use different language. Usually, it was just a case of going, well, your split was this, and this split was this, and basically highlighting how crap you were, or you could have done better. Even when it was a PB, well done, but yeah, your split. I really kind of thought, is that the right kind of feedback? Is that the right kind of conversation I should start with? Why am I thinking that? I'll be honest, it was the way I was coached. That's exactly what I used to do, is get out, go see my coach, and that's exactly the feedback I'd get. And I think that, again, that's a big topic itself as well, just the fundamental problem of that rolling form of life that is kind of, it rolls on and encapsulates for us, in swim coaching, that the way I was coached is embedded culturally, social culturally in me, to how I present myself forwards. And I think it'd be really interesting to look how ways we can actually harness our forms of life, also recognizing the ways they constrain us. I was speaking to someone the other day, and I said, they asked me, Andy, what is a form of life? Like, how can you describe it? I said, look, I enjoyed the subject. I'm not, I wouldn't say I was an expert on it. If you really wanted to know more, I'd look up work by Martin Rothwell. But I said, one example I remember chatting about was when England played Italy in the Euro final. I remember talking before it, and everyone was like, oh God, the England players are probably going to get a red card. They're going to get frustrated. And I was like, why are they going to do that? This the way the Italians play, they're going to dive. They're going to play the game. They're going to play the ref. They're going to have that kind of gamesmanship element that is totally acceptable. It is within the rules of the game. It's totally acceptable. The diving, the theatrics that we can say with certain teams, but the English mentality towards that is they're cheating. They're dishonourable. It's not chivalry. It's not chivalry. It's seen with distaste, and that's what rattles the players. You can see that form of life is constraining the England players. This is the conversation before the game. We've seen evidence. When Beckham lashed out Simeone in the 98 World Cup, you see that kind of, it just boils them up. When we watch on the TV, we see someone dive for a penalty. It's not nice. It kind of never sits easy, even if it's our own team and when they score the penalty, something doesn't really sit right with the way they did that if we know that they dived. But in other countries, they don't care. That's just the way that's just the game. It means you win. So you can see where that kind of social cultural form of life kind of constrains the mentality and the approach that you can take. In my context, the form of life out here that really constrains things is the high academic pressure from an early age. And it is really bad here. The weight of academics. A lot of places talk about holistic development, but it's not even close. The academic pressure is very heavy, and I don't think it's very difficult to change that form of life because it's so embedded. It's slightly different to just normal social culturalness. It's much bigger because it's got that historical context. When British people generally walk down the street and someone walks into us, we say sorry. it's just, I'm generalizing, but you say, oh, sorry. Well, why am I sorry? I'm not sorry. You walked into, you walked into me, but I do it all the time. My parents did it all the time. My brothers do it. My friends do, pretty much everyone I've known and grown up with does that. So I think it's also really important to understand when we start to look at how we teach skill, and get an understanding of that. I mean, the research is still pretty fresh, I think. How we can understand that to really start to look at how learners learn. So some people might just prefer a linearized, reductionist approach to being taught something. But I think in order to know that, we need to understand them better and understand the athlete. And that's where, we talk about a lot about the coach-athlete relationship and an understanding of where you are in your context to determine kind of what your athlete outcomes are and how you satisfy them.
I think that's there's again another thesis that could be done just on that sort of thing. And I think depends obviously on the nature of your environment of teaching, whether you're in a learn to swim class, a club, a football team, whatever it is, but actually you're standing in front of, unless you're in a very fortunate situation, more than one person. Therefore, your styles, your approach, your communications are always going to be split at worst in half, and in some cases 30 or 40 different ways. And I feel I have certainly come off the back of the break, if you like, over the last 18 months and felt we have an opportunity that we've probably never had before to ask why, systematically asking why.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting question by itself. And I think it'll be interesting to see where it goes, because I think there is a split in the current camps, if you like, certainly in sport, where there's a race from one group of people to get back to the start line pre-COVID as quickly as possible. And then there's another group of people who are going, why on earth would we ever go back to that? We've got a chance to embrace everything from the last 18 months, technology, flexibility, all of those sorts of things. And you're seeing it in the business world. Some businesses that are absolutely adamant, we will get our staff back in soon. And then you get other companies that are like, no, like, let's embrace it. Like I was talking to one of my friends actually recently, rang me up out of the blue. I haven't spoken to him for like a year. And he's an architect, and was saying to me how he doesn't go into the office now. And because when they go into the office, they're always out in the field generally. So they never go into the office as a group. It was just going into the office to do what you're now doing from home. And he said, I get up in the morning, I drop my daughter at school, I then come back, I do my work, I break for about half an hour to go and pick her up from school. She comes in and I'm downstairs ready for dinner when it's served to the rest of the family. And he said, for my own life satisfaction, I could not be happier right now. He said, I'm still doing my work. And he said, my company is still billing the same amount that they were before. But the difference is I now get to have dinner with my daughter every day and pick her up from school and hear how her day was. And there are people who are in a race to get away from that. And you're like, listen to your staff, listen to your audience. And I think that comes back to what you're talking about with the coach-athlete relationship. We could change that for students. We could change that for employee. And I think too often people aren't prepared to listen to them. I'm in charge. This is how we're doing it. This is how we've always done it. And I think that's kind of how my podcast was built, of finding people who are happy to ask those questions, not necessarily solve the problem, because all it does is start a conversation, and then you get different viewpoints and 1 degree shifts in another direction, which is fine. Some big changes take time, but ultimately there are places that will dig their heels in and go, no, this is how we do it. And it's like you're getting a generation of kids that are coming through in education and sport going, no, it's not of interest to me. No, thank you. I either disengage from school or I disengage from sport. And then we go, I can't understand why school standards are slipping, or we've got an obesity crisis on our hands. It's like, because what you're selling now is not appropriate for the clients you've got in front of you.
Yeah, I think I was even chatting to a colleague today, the hierarchical systems, and I'm feeling where you're saying some places are going back and some people are going back for sure. I'm feeling that, and it's that kind of top down kind of systems. They're secure, they're stability. I think it's that craving for stability that kind of probably drawing things back. But like I said, I think what you've done, I think what's happened with all these kind of podcasts and presentations and networks, it's showing the power of integration. and it's showing the power of a bottom up and a top down approach to information, to knowledge, to productivity, to everything. You ask any. I always remember this. You walk into a school, and who was the most important people in the school to get on with as a teacher? I always remember my first mentor saying, Andy, first one is the cleaner, the second one is the janitor, and the third one is the canteen lady. I was like, oh, I was kind of expecting to say like the deputy head, the head, and like my bosses. He goes, no, because if you want your kit, if you want your cupboard with all your kit sorted, or if anything breaks, you need the janitor. If you want this room where you work clean, you want the cleaner on side, because otherwise it won't get cleaned. And they do a lot, all the other jobs that they can do to support. He goes, when you're hungry at lunchtime because you've been on duty at break and you haven't eaten anything all day and you've been teaching since 8 o'clock in the morning, and you've got 20 minutes for lunch and you've got kids knocking on the PE room door asking to borrow a pump, and you want the canteen lady to go, here, have some food. So you can start to, I usually just kind of just came into my head just now, like the importance of that kind of bi-directional flow of information and connectiveness. I think it's sad even when I experience it myself, like, it does make me sad when it's like, you do this. This is how it's done. It comes down, and it's. I think the world is definitely shifting. I think the way that we coach, I feel, is shifting. I think you say, we should be asking why. I'm also thinking, why have we not asked why before? How far do we go with that? Why has it always been accepted? And I think comes back to that forms of life. Sometimes there is no answer. It's just that's just what has been. That's just how it's done. So unless there's kind of processes in place that allow for that question to be asked, having that critical voice in the room. I was chatting with some colleagues today who coach at Upper Sports. I said, we can't sit together as a coaching body, and all be yes to each other. We can't have someone, I remember his amazing ideas and things. I remember we used to sit there sometimes in meetings and just accept what he told us. Now, he could be selling us anything. He could have thought, I'm going to have a bit of a joke today and come in and sell a load of crap. But no, unless we say, yeah, well, hang on a minute, do you mind explaining that? What about this? I can see a problem with that. Unless there's anyone in the room that can do that, I think it leaves opens up to another 20, 30 years of it's just how it's done. The same. Yeah. And it's that stability. And if as from a corporation or whatever kind of point of view, or as us as coaches, but also from the athletes, they'll become stable into that system. They become like metronomes. But whereas actually, I think the more we talk and the more podcasts I've listened, the ones of yours and other people's, we understand the complexities of people. We understand we need them to be resilient and adaptable. But yet the way that pedagogical practice and coaching practice, I'm not sure, and I'd question, does it allow for that?
I just like the phrase giving people permission, like that on its own, whatever it is, whether in a teaching environment, coaching environment, home environment. And it always, for me, it was one of the earliest things that I can remember from like my educational times when I've really engaged with it. And I remember being in what would have probably now been called sports science, but it was basically PE in the classroom. And I remember them talking about the different types of play. And it still sticks with me today. And that was like 20 something years ago. And they used the phrase, something to the effect of, children play to try and improve their grasp on reality, and adults play to try and escape reality. And I was kind of like, if you change the word play for almost any other aspect of explorative learning, that's ultimately what we're trying to do when we have these kind of conversations. We're giving people to play. We're giving people permission to play, and that's it.
Yeah, I really like that's a really great way of putting it. Yeah.
What off the back of, we're in the second part of this now, so this has been over quite a long period of time. What's been the one thing that you've changed philosophically, if you like, in terms of if you had to boil it down to one thing that you're like, this is absolutely got to change for me personally, not necessarily culturally in my wider profession, but for me personally, what do I walk on deck on a Monday and make sure is different off the back of your experiences so far?
Philosophically, I think every time I walk out, I get my kind of go out in, and I see my swimmers, or I'm thinking and I'm watching what's going on and I'm observing. I tend to retreat my thought back to nothing. I draw my thought back to, okay, I know absolutely nothing. And I try to go from that approach. Okay, well, the pool is still the same, water's still the same. As far as I know, the same density I've got in front of me. Okay, let's build from there, right? What's coming up? What skills are they going to need? How they're swimming? What opportunities can I give them to make choices about what they're doing as well? And yeah, that kind of sounds, I remember when I kind of heard talk about that before, and it's all very fluffy. It doesn't actually say anything. Because I could just be making it up. So I think when I'll give it like an example, and I think this is where the use of like technology can come in as well. I walked in and I thought, right, start the season, and I'm basing it on feel. I want them to try and get a feeling and increase their self-awareness of how they're swimming. So I could just get to swim. I could do any number of sets. I'm sure, we can all list things that we could do. So I retreated back to, okay, well, listening to myself at that point of knowing nothing. Well, I can hear my heartbeat. And I thought, right, let's go from there then. And I got the OH1P monitors out, got them all hooked up to that on the iPad so they could see. And I said, right, guys, I want you to try and swim. We'll swim hundreds. We'll go 30 minutes. Different times. I might have even just said go off your own time. This is literally like day one back. And I said, I want you to try and get the lowest score you can, combining your heart rate with your time in seconds over 100 meters. And the arrow thing building on that, which kind of makes it like my point 1A and point 1B would be from that point, I have no idea how they feel doing that. And so what I really try hard to do is make sure I get that athlete feedback to complete, as Rick used to tell me, complete that athlete loop, the athlete feedback loop with me and them. So I think from a philosophical point of view, it's accepting that actually from their point of view, I don't know anything. So how do I construct my practice to get them to perform skills, do it right, do it fast under pressure? Okay, so where do I need to start with that? I need to start with what my environment is, what's my playing field, get my principles, increase propulsion, decrease drag. Okay, from there, right, what do I need to try to decrease drag and increase propulsion? Well, if I'm listening to my heartbeat, I'm trying to keep in control, I'm going to be trying to swim as smooth. You kind of feel yourself trying to swim as smooth as possible. Even when I think about it now, I was watching the kids, I kind of imagine myself swimming to the beat of my heart and trying, it's something, I don't know if you've ever done it, when you kind of sit in the bath and you try to like lower your own heart rate. It's kind of like being in control of your body. For me, that's kind of my answer to that. It could go a lot deeper, but I think in a nutshell, that's what I'd say.
It's a really nice way to pull it together, because I think, it kind of highlights, even across our two discussions so far, this process of ongoing learning. I listened to a talk, I'm not sure if you've heard it yet, of Mel Marshall being interviewed recently on the High Performance podcast. He said every night when you go to bed an expert. Every morning when you wake up, it's a choice. Approach each day as a beginner. And I thought that was a really nice way of just articulating how that mentality of walking onto poolside and the information I've got in front of me, or walking into a classroom or walking out onto a football pitch, the information I perceive is incomplete. And how do I structure my session, my practice, my language to make sure that I have the most complete information possible from them and from what I'm seeing, so that actually the response that I get is as well informed as possible. And I think too often, like you say, we've always behaved a certain way or fed back a certain way or done something a certain way because that's how we've been conditioned to do it. And is that the best way of doing it? That's up to everyone to choose, I guess, how to model their practice. But no, it's been really, really interesting. And I think we're going to have to do a third one at some point as well.
Yeah, I mean, another month or 2 months or whatever, there'll be so much to feedback. Yeah, every time I talk, and then even after this first talk, and the talk I did with Russ on the swim coaching network, even after you do these talks, I'll think back later at night. I'll go to bed, in like 30 minutes time. I'm thinking, yeah, that would have been better said there. This would have gone in here. Okay, how? So it's almost like, and like this came up actually really nicely, but I can't remember his name. He was one of the diving coaches at Swim England. He was saying the importance of his reflection. I think we can all agree on how important that is. But I did ask, it was a busy conference. I did ask, well, we talk about reflection as such a powerful tool. I don't think it's really ever taught. How do you reflect properly? Is there a way to reflect properly? Was it just completely down to, good luck, just reflect and hope you remember stuff? Or is there actually a way? And I remember my mentors at university, they introduced us to the Gibbs cycle. I won't be able to remember all of it, but in a nutshell, it's kind of like your thoughts, your description, your action points, then your decision, conclusion kind of thing that would then lead on. I think a more complex example might be one of those military OODA loops or something, some kind of like that. But I think it doesn't really matter what you kind of use, but I don't think I was ever in all my years of coach education and the number of courses I've done really had that explained to me, the richness of reflection. I remember doing my teacher training. It was always about, you've got to write your evaluation up after every lesson. I just used to remember seeing it as a chore. My evaluation, my reflection, I find I get about 15 to 20 minute window somewhere within an hour after the session where I get my thoughts. But I mean, in the context of teacher training, you've got 5 lessons a day and you've got to do an evaluation for each one and lesson plans. So I just used to write them down just to get them done. I wouldn't say they were properly my reflections. It was just how many of these Q standards can I get ticked off? That's what it was. I don't think it was a very powerful tool for my reflection. I think it needs. I think me personally, I needed short, sharp points. Even in I'm very dyslexic. Sometimes I can read words. There is no from letters that there is no word there. That's just how my brain works. So I can write shorthand, quick notes. Scatty paper, and that's my reflection. And usually, once I've done that, it's in, and I can that's my reflection cycle. So I think maybe that's something I can definitely improve on. I think also it'd be nice to get some more input from a coach educational side of things. Actually, how do we reflect on our practice better and more effectively?
I think that certainly needs to be in from day one, not just in coaching, but in so many professions where actually it almost does feel like a chore because it becomes a KPI as opposed to it's an ongoing learning opportunity to actually deliver a better service, whatever service it is that you happen to deliver. So no, it's been fascinating, and now I'm already in my head starting to reflect on some of the key points to come out of that discussion and going, right, tomorrow when we drop each other a text, what's it going to be that we pin for the next conversation? But no, it's been really good fun, and I'm looking forward to seeing where it goes next.
Nice one. Thanks for having me back.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. And don't forget, we've got a back catalogue of content that goes all the way back to January 2020, including fighter pilots, Olympic champions, TV presenters, and inspiring authors. We'd really appreciate it if you can give us a quick rate and review, however you're joining us today. And if you don't want to miss out on any future episodes, make sure you hit subscribe. Our community update drops once a month, and we've got some great guest content being added, so be sure to sign up for that. And finally, we're all about inspiring and supporting as many people as possible. So if you can share this episode with one person that you think would enjoy it, that would be really, really cool. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of the Rogue Monkey podcast.